The MAGA Republicans in Donald Trump's cabinet and in the House of Representatives and Senate losing their minds after the release of those 20,000 Epstein emails. And also, they're now hiding the economic data. They're saying that the Bureau of Labor Statistics no longer has good data. They're blaming the shutdown, and they may not provide data into the future. Then you have Trump's top economic advisor, Kevin Hassett, saying, well, maybe we're just going to have to concoct some information. Who knows? Maybe we'll concoct it. Here, play this clip.
And the household survey wasn't conducted in October. So we're going to get half the employment report. We'll get the jobs part, but we won't get the unemployment rate. And that'll just be for 1 month. But yeah, it is true that we probably will maybe be able to concoct something, but we'll never actually know for sure what the unemployment rate was in October.
We'll never know. We'll just maybe concoct it. I mean, when it comes to important financial data, the word concoct isn't the word that you like to hear. Then they bring in the other economic advisor, Peter Navarro, who says he toggles between there's no inflation and then the inflation is all Biden's fault and let's blame Biden for everything. Here, play this clip.
Explain really carefully about this Democrat con job. And let's be clear what it is. They want to blame Donald Trump for what is Biden legacy inflation.
Yeah.
And we have to be very clear about two things. One, go category by category: housing, food, transportation, healthcare, exactly what we're doing. And we also have to remind people that everything the Democrats do pushes inflation up, and that the only reason.
So let's take no responsibility for anything 10 months into this administration that is going to keep saying Biden's name 20 years from now. And they bring in MAGA Republican Congress member Pete Sessions, and he's asked a very basic question. What's your reaction to these Epstein emails that mention Trump's name? I'm sure you have to have some view, Sessions, right? I mean, you're on the Oversight Committee. Anything you want to share here? Here, play this clip.
You say there are many questions. You still have a question about whether Donald Trump knew about the sexual abuse at the hands of Jeffrey Epstein?
Well, I've not gone through all of the documents here yet. As you said, there's 20,000 pages. Our staff is going through this. I have been back home in Waco, Texas for the last 3 weeks dealing with the shutdown there. I will get back to it. We will get this done. But what we're doing right now is taking the huge number of emails, of data, of pages, and going through it. And there will be, on a bipartisan basis, an agreement about how we're going to hold formal hearings, who we're going to ask.
Now, I want to do something different here. Now, normally I'd show you a few more clips, and I'll show you how, I think, insane and crazy and dangerous these MAGA Republicans are being, and the gaslighting, the lies. But what we talk about here on the network very frequently is these broader values about our democracy, our nation's founding. So I want to do something different and remind us of that. I want to bring in right now Ken Burns. Ken Burns, incredible filmmaker, documentarian, my favorite documentarian ever. You've been making films about the American story, about the American struggle for democracy for 5 decades right now. And you're out with a new one. I think it's very timely. Enough of that political stuff. We're talking about the American Revolution, how we moved away from kings into the country that we are today. And I think that's relevant and salient. I want to speak to you about that first. Let me ask you just about that. And then I want to show people the trailer here because it brought chills to me when I saw it, especially in light of all the craziness. But just talk to us about American Revolution right now.
So I've been working for almost 10 years on a history of the American Revolution. I began it when Barack Obama had 13 months to go in his presidency. And of course, there's been a lot of water under the American bridge in the time then. Mark Twain is supposed to have said that history doesn't repeat itself. He's right. No event has happened twice, but it rhymes. And for 50 years, I've been making films about subjects in American history, and it always rhymes. And those rhymes change, particularly over the course of projects like this one that took 10 years, or the Vietnam War that took 10 and a half years. The rhymes are pretty, obvious. However, as filmmakers, we have to have blinders on. We want to just acknowledge them and just be disciplined to not say, isn't this so much like today? Because they change. We have the voice of a German officer's wife who's crossing the Atlantic to join her husband, part of the Hessian mercenaries the Brits have hired to augment the British Army. And she's heard a rumor that Americans eat cats. Now, if the film had, for some reason, the grace of God and funding come out last year, that would be a big deal. And people would say, can you put that in there because of the crazy arguments about immigrants eating cats in Springfield, Ohio? I think it's going to go on Sunday, the 16th over everybody's. Nobody's going to notice that. But there may be other rhymes that they pick up. I pay that no mind. But let me just say, as you suggested, that the Old Testament says there's nothing new under the sun. On July 4, 1776, there was. Everybody up to that point had been under authoritarian rule, had been a subject. It was in the interests of their rulers that they be uneducated, that they be superstitious, that they be distracted by conspiracies, and that suddenly had something new. And they were speaking not just about their present moment, but all of us, the unborn millions, John Adams said, who would benefit from the success of this revolution. And they were creating a new thing. Citizens, and that the pursuit of happiness for them uniformly was not the pursuit of objects in a marketplace of things, but lifelong learning in a marketplace of ideas. Because if you continue to educate yourself, you would become more virtuous, less susceptible to, as Adam said, ambition and avarice and greed, and that virtue would allow you to enjoy and be able to have the active idea of citizenship. This is brand new in the world, and this is one hell of a story. And it isn't just guys in Philadelphia thinking great thoughts. And we try to remove the opacity of many of them, but we introduce you to scores of other folks who didn't have their portraits painted, who are as important to the story of the revolution. And they're women, half the population. There's out of 3,500,000 free and enslaved Black people who've been imported from Africa. There are native nations coexisting and assimilated within the 13 colonies. And to the west are native nations really hoping what is going to happen, regardless of who wins, that their lands will be protected. And they're, of course, not. It's an incredible dynamic. It's a revolution. It's a civil war, as bloody a civil war as we have. Our civil war is not really a civil war. It's a sectional war. And it's a world war, the fourth world war for the prize, global war, for the prize of North America. And that's a really interesting and complicated story that it's taken us 10 years. And when we started, nobody was talking 250. Nobody was talking about all this stuff. And of course, as I said, Barack Obama had 13 months to go in his presidency.
Right. Because the film should transcend
Exactly.
administrations and it should appeal to our basic identity of Americans. I hope the Supreme Court justices are watching this because oftentimes they like to claim that they have historical perspectives or they're originalists and that they interpret these doctrinal issues through their view of history. That's their new.
The last 9 months, I've been touring the country, and I've said the same thing to everybody. Said the same thing to a 2.5-hour conversation with Joe Rogan and you and Theo Vaughn, as I said to the editorial board of the New York Times, to inner city school kids in Charleston, South Carolina, and Detroit and Chicago, to general audiences from Seattle to Los Angeles, from Charleston to Boston, and every place in between. And I say the same things. We're umpires throwing balls and strikes, but that's exactly what you want is to, we live in a world in which it's just a highlight film, right? So Babe Ruth, if you're going to show Babe Ruth, you could just show him hitting a home run. Well, Babe Ruth strikes out more often than he hits home runs, and he comes up only once every 9 times at bat. And sometimes it's that middle infielder, the second baseman or the shortstop who's making diddly, who comes up batting ninth, who's the star of the thing. The last World Series to the Blue Jays' ever-loving, despair is about that. So what we try to do is engage all of these stories. I was talking to the conservative scholar Yuval Levin, and he said, the founders would come to this moment, they would be unsurprised that somebody was seeking kind of monarchical power. They'd be devastated that Article 1 of the Constitution, which is about the legislative branch, that would have abdicated what they felt was fundamental role in being the check, the governor, the determiner of what the executive was going to do. And that would be the big shame of it. And that's from a conservative scholar. So I have a feeling that when we're in the moment and we're so dialectically preoccupied, everything's red state or blue state, rich or poor, young or old, gay or straight, north, south, east, west, we forget the reconciling power of a good story. The novelist Richard Powers said that the best arguments in the world won't change a single point of view. The only thing that can do that is a good story. It's a kind of benevolent Trojan horse that comes out in the night, not to murder the citizens of the city or to burn that city, but to remind them of the complexity of human life, that the dialectic of politics and of our computer system, everything's a 1 or a 0, do not permit us to enjoy. And so I've labored really long in this field. It's really tough to be disciplined, but the rewards are great because you do have a chance to speak to people that not necessarily agree with your particular politics or one side or the other. And I was just recently on C-SPAN, which has this morning call-in show. They have a Democratic line, a Republican line, and an independent line. And I've been on it before, and usually you're dodging bullets from one and the other. And all of them began their questions, which is, we really love your work. And so I just thought, okay, great. Maybe a story, when a person's in crisis, you go to a pastor or a professional and they ask about your parents and when you were born and your childhood. Maybe for a country in crisis, in division, way more divided during our revolution. There are loyalists that patriots are killing and civilians and vice versa. Maybe have a chance to go back and be healed, to put, I hope, the us back in the U.S. And maybe the divisions are a mile wide, but only an inch thick.
What's interesting is, as you say, Article 1, total capitulation. Article 3, at the district court level and circuit court level, by and large, the checks hold at the Supreme Court level, in my view, recognizing the doctrine of absolute immunity and using a historical perspective to justify absolute immunity, to me, makes no sense, because the very nature of our country, as when people watch the American Revolution will see, was against authoritarians, against the concept of absolute immunity. But then the only thing that seems to be kind of holding in an interesting way, in an ironic way, is federalism in states' rights, and seeing blue states, and I'm not trying to get into political here, but states asserting themselves and the vastness of our country, and it making it difficult for an authoritarian to control, say, something like California, that would be the 4th largest, where I live, the 4th largest GDP in the world if it was a country, or Illinois, and sending in ICE agents there, but states fighting back in a way that...
Well, you know what? I really urge your listeners and you to watch this 6-part, 12-hour series, because I think it will arm you with an important set of facts, not opinions, not reactions, but facts about what the United States. There's a wonderful, we follow, as I was saying, scores of people that I'd never heard of, and I'm pretty sure you've never heard of either, about it. And they're the wife of German officers. There's a German soldier, Johann Ewald, don't mean to pick on the Germans, who's openly contemptuous throughout the film about the rebels, as the Brits and the Germans call the patriots. And yet he's in the surrendering army at Yorktown. And he said, who would have thought 100 years ago that out of this multitude of rabble could arise a people who could defy kings?
Are we defying kings right now? How do you see us in this moment?
I'm totally focused on the moment of the revolution where we were most definitely defying. I mean, the odds at Lexington Green were 0 of success of this new idea. And the loyalists aren't enemies in our film. They're people who say, look, all of my health, my prosperity, the land I own, my family had spent 1,000 years working as dependents on somebody else's land in Wales and England and Scotland and Ireland. And now I've owned some land. Why would I throw this away for this untested idea? But a lot of people did. And it turned out to be a pretty good experiment. And I think by going back and gathering the threads of all the complexity, democracy was not the object of the revolution. It was a consequence of it. You know, these guys were forming an elite, as people would complain today, of a Republican, small r Republican experiment. But in order to win that war, teenagers were fighting the Continental Army. There were second and third sons, laborers without a job, second and third sons without a chance of an inheritance, recent immigrants with no property, and a war that began to protect the rights of propertied males becomes fought by people who had little or no property. So democracy becomes part of the reward for helping the success of this. That alone is an interesting thing. And we also have phrases like pursuit of happiness, more perfect union. We're a nation in the process of becoming. This story of the revolution is the Big Bang, and it's an ever expanding universe. Do we take steps back? Yes, we do. Does the acceleration slow? Yes, it does. But there are lots of ways in which the story of the revolution can give courage, can give hope, can provide optimism. I mean, today, optimism is looked at as a kind of naive and pejorative condition. But jadedness and snark, I mean, jadedness is only for journalists and jet setters, it seems to me, and that you got to be a citizen. And citizen is actively engaged in reminding people what the American project has been about, good and bad. You can get an A on your test in 8th grade if you say taxes and representation, but we put Indian land first. That's what we wanted. More than anything else. This is the 4th global war over the prize for North America, and that prize is the land. And that land is occupied for 22,000 or 12,000 or whatever number you're going to say by people who don't have the same sense of property and deeds and things that inherited from Europe, but they nonetheless have that land. And Benjamin Franklin himself, impressed by the Haudenosaunee, the Iroquois Confederacy, this sort of 6 nations that had figured out a way to have their own trade and foreign policy, but protect the states' rights. You're talking about California or Illinois or whatever it might be. And at the same time, protect the interests of their independent nations, sometimes with different linguistic roots, certainly with different kinds of people. And he says, why can't we do that? 20 years before the revolution. It doesn't work. Nobody wants to give up their autonomy. But 20 years later, the war cry that he had put at the beginning, join or die, the picture of the snake cut up into pieces, the snake representing the various colonies, becomes the war cry in the most consequential revolution in history. So it's a good story, and it will, I think, I don't want to say arm. I think it will provide enough information to understand the complexity of then, to understand how they're way more divided then than now. And that might provide a new way or a new approach, a new tack to how you don't, as the novelist Richard Powers says, don't make arguments, but tell stories that have the way of reconciling and sort of ignoring the dialectic, which is the enemy of anything, right? We know this in our personal lives. We know this in our love. We know this in our art and our literature. 1 and 1 equals 3. Our faith, 1 and 1 equals 3. You can't build a bridge, but or airplane without 1 and 1 always equaling 2. But the thing we look for, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Here's the whole, here are the sum of the parts. What's this? That's why I make films about that.
Ken, can we watch the trailer together? I want people to be able to see it before you go, because I think the trailer is so powerful.
Oh, good. Yeah, sure. I just want to say I didn't edit this. This is PBS pulling from our 12-hour film.
All right, let's play it.
Spark kindled in America. A flame has arisen, not to be extinguished.
We think about independence movements of the 20th century. You don't always recognize the fact that the United States actually started that.
The American Revolutionary Movement served as a model for freedom from oppression.
America is predicated on an idea that tells us who we are, where we came from, and what our forebears were willing to die for.
Collins said no taxation without representation. The fear was, if we give in to this precedent, what will they do in the future?
Crisis changes people. It gave different people different ideas about what they should be doing.
The that gave them a space to make this democracy real.
The founders thought we can start over again. We can begin the world anew.
The British objective is to suppress the rebellion, force them to acknowledge the authority of the king.
Washington understands the war he's fighting. He doesn't have to win. He only has not to lose. He becomes quite eloquent in trying to persuade people we're all Americans.
We see regiments with individuals who are not carrying arms, doing essential labor, including women.
They are at the forefront of this movement.
One of the most remarkable aspects is that you had such different places come together as one nation.
It mushrooms into a global campaign that touches Europe and all parts of the world.
It so excites us that we are the product of a revolutionary moment where the world turned upside down.
To believe in America is to believe in possibility.
Sunday, November 16th, the first part, it will run until Friday. To believe in America is to believe in possibility.
And she goes on and says, even those people who lack the ownership of themselves had on either side has something to believe in, because these arguments between Brits suddenly get blown out into transcendent liberties. And that's where why these people would continue fighting against all odds, against one of the great military powers on earth, certainly the greatest navy on the face of the globe, and to win in 6.5 long, bloody years is just as and Washington, who's the most important person, we don't have a country without him, for all his flaws and all of his rashness and all of his bad tactical mistakes he makes throughout it, nonetheless is the person who convinces people that you're not a Georgian, you're not a New Hampshireite, you're an American, this new thing. And he gives up his power twice, which is just the stunning thing. He's able to inspire people in the dead of night to fight. He's able to pick subordinate talent, unjealous of whether they're better generals, and many of them were than him. But nobody had the rectitude, nobody had the command, nobody had the dignity. Somebody says, Benjamin Rush, the only physician who signed the thing, he said all other monarchs in Europe would look like valet de chambre next to him, right? You know what a valet de chambre is? The guy who's pouring out the piss pot next to George Washington. So you have to wrestle with the complications. You've got this guy who owns other human beings, this guy who rides out and risks the whole cause in the battlefield, and a guy who makes some tactical mistakes. Particularly, I'm in New York, in Long Island. His failure to protect his left flank causes the biggest battle of the revolution to be lost and be a humiliating patriotic defeat that will just in a few days lose him not just Brooklyn, but all of Manhattan as well. And New York becomes, for 7 years and 2 months, a loyalist and British headquarters. And it's not until 2 years after Yorktown that he gets to ride back in and kind of reclaim the city that his own mistake had lost. But without him, we don't have a country.
We still have our country.
We still have our country.
Yeah, and when we head until Thanksgiving, we still have it. And there have been very trying times in our history.
More trying than this. There are some aspects that are unprecedented. I think you brought them up. But at the same time, you wouldn't trade this moment to go back in the revolution. And remember how the Declaration ends. We mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. George Washington may be one of the richest men in America. Can you imagine any of the richest men pledging their lives and their fortunes and their sacred honor to a cause that's so untested and untried? And he did it. He spent 4 days at Mount Vernon. He's either in somebody else's house. That's why it's super important where George Washington slept, or he's in a tent for most of the 6.5 years of the revolution. And his officers are deserting and heading back home because they can make money from both sides. You can play the Patriot side, you can play the British side, you can make money off it. And he stays. And so do the common people who fight, the teenagers and the ne'er-do-wells and the second and third sons without a chance of an inheritance of those recent immigrants. And they win the war for you and for me.
And here we are. We fight. Ken Burns, American Revolution, November 16th, PBS.
Streaming for free at pbs.org starting Sunday. You can get the whole thing streaming if you want it for free.
Ken, thanks for all the work you've done in your incredible career, and thanks for this labor of love and labor of labor. It took you 10 years.
Well, I won't. I'll tell you, I won't work on a more important film than this one.
Well, I'm excited to watch it, and I know our 6 million subscribers are as well. Everybody, make sure you hit subscribe. Ken, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Love this video? Continue the conversation by following us on Instagram @MeidasTouch and help us blow past 1 million followers.